Hello and good morning everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. So we're joined here by Rika from VMware, who will be going through the webinar with you, and then also Peter Ely from Bytes, who will be mentioning a little bit about VMware AirWatch at the end of the webinar.
Perfect, thank you. So good morning everyone. My name is Rika and I work at VMware as a networking and security specialist. We just call them NSX specialists. I've been with VMware for about a year and a half, coming up to 2 years, and before I specialized in physical data center technology. So that's the background I've been, or the background I came from. So I've got about 30 to 35 minutes to give you a high-level overview about what VMware NSX is, what it does, and bear in mind that typically when we work with customers, we spend roughly about 2 to 3 hours to whiteboard and go through details of what NSX can do. So what I'm hoping to achieve from the session today is, as I said, give you a high-level overview. And if you like what you hear, don't hesitate to speak to Bytes about getting a little bit more insight into it. So from a agenda point of view, I will want to give you a bit of an overview about where NSX fits into the overall strategy and vision for VMware. Then I'll go through what NSX is, what the capabilities are, where we are in the market from a momentum perspective, and then after that we are going to discuss some of the resources that you've got available from VMware as well as Bytes. If we can go to the next one, thank you. So about 18 or 24 months ago, VMware executives have gone out to speak to our customers and understand where they are going and what they are planning from an application landscape perspective. Our executives went out and spoke to CEOs, infrastructure VPs, infrastructure operations VPs, etc., to understand what the next steps are from a cloud strategy perspective. And there were key two takeaways from the exercise. One of them was that there is a significant pressure that our customers are feeling from a digital transformation perspective, and it's putting a lot of pressure on customers to understand their application portfolio. So what we found that you, as customers, are looking at a number of different ways of managing those applications. One is what you can see on the left-hand side, is that you have applications that you would like to keep as they are, don't change them, but modernize the underlying infrastructure to make and provide a lot more cloud-like environment. There are applications that you would like to move to the cloud, and you are able to re-platform some of those in order to gain the benefits of a cloud environment. And then there are applications that you would like to build in the cloud. So this is what we refer to as develop for the cloud environment, because of the digital transformation and some of the digital application requirements that we've seen recently. And then finally, there are applications as well that you don't want to manage anymore, things that you don't want to deal with anymore, hence looking at the likes of SaaS applications. So that was one of the key takeaways. But then the second takeaway was that there was not a single customer that only wanted to use one of these cloud strategies. Everybody was looking at a mixture of these. And VMware's vision and strategy was built around that, to be able to provide an environment where you can take any application, you can build it on any cloud, and you're able to provide those applications to any users or customers on any device. If you can move to the next slide, please. So this is this any app, any cloud, any device strategy is that VMware vision is built around. And if you look at our overall portfolio, if you can move to the next slide, please. If you're looking at what we do from an overall infrastructure perspective, it does follow that structure is any cloud and any application and on any device. What we are going to talk about today is the bottom piece, is how do we give organizations a consistent infrastructure to be able to provide this vision and strategy on-premise as well as in the cloud environment. And the core of the consistent infrastructure is where we talk about the software-defined data center stack. And this is what you can see on the next slide. At the end, we'll come and talk about this again. So when we talk about a software-defined data center stack, we talk about the vSphere, which is something that everybody will be familiar with. We're talking about vSAN, our software-defined storage strategy, and we talk about NSX, which is what we call our software-defined networking strategy, where we look at networking and security policies and move them into the software. If you can move to the next slide, please. So this is what we refer to as the cloud foundation. It's a stack that comprises of vSphere, NSX, and vSAN. NSX being that final piece of the software-defined data center strategy to give you that complete consistency. So this is what we do on-premise, is what you can see on the bottom left of that screen, the on-premise data center. And some of the recent announcements that you might have come across already, such as VMware Cloud and AWS, is a representation of how we allow you to bring that consistency and flexibility built on the same software-defined data center stack in a cloud environment. So with regards to the announcement with AWS, something that we already do with the likes of IBM. Sorry, can you go? Yeah. Something that we already do with the likes of IBM and our vCloud network partners is that we allow you to build a complete software-defined data center stack on Amazon's bare metal infrastructure. So now you don't just have that stack on-premise, but you have that in a cloud environment, giving you that consistency and flexibility and choice. Now, obviously, this is something that's built on a vSphere infrastructure, but what happens if you would like to use native applications from the likes of AWS? We have the capability now in some of the announcements that we did not too long ago, where we provide SaaS applications such as NSX as a service, cloud or custom SaaS as a service that you can see on the right hand side of the on that stack. So the reason I wanted to bring that up and talk about the cloud infrastructure and that software-defined data center stack, because we wouldn't be able to allow our customers to use that flexibility unless we've got a solution of how to abstract that network and security policies and the intelligence and do that without NSX. So NSX is very much a very key part of that strategy, something that provides the platform for the consistent infrastructure. You can move to the next slide, please. So what is NSX? So NSX, as I mentioned, is the complete abstraction of networking and security services from the physical underlying infrastructure. If you can move to the next slide, please. It is a hypervisor-based distributed networking and security services platform. And when we talk about networking and security services, we talk about switching, routing, load balancing, and firewalling, all being built into the hypervisor. If you can move to the next one, please. And this is what you can see on the left-hand side. So why are we moving into the hypervisor space? So about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, VMware bought a company called Nicira, and we bought them for the capabilities of what you can see on that slide. We also had a product called vCNS, vCloud Networking and Security, and by combining it with the controllers of Nicira, the company that we bought, we started building all these services right inside of the hypervisor. And the reason we've done that because we believe that this is the best place to achieve that complete high context and high isolation from a security perspective. From a layer 2 perspective, we do switching. From a layer 3, as I mentioned, we do routing. And from a load balancing perspective, it isn't a full load balancer, not something that you would be able to get from the likes of F5. But what we see is that most of our customers get most of the functionality that you need in order to provide sufficient capabilities of doing load balancing inside of the data center. It is a completely hardware independent solution. So we don't care if you are running Brocade, Cisco, Arista, you name the physical underlying infrastructure. We can lay NSX on top, and that's what we see is something that customers can benefit from, again, from a flexibility perspective, but also potentially from a cost perspective, because we see customers sweating assets and potentially reducing the cost and the budgets that are spent on that underlying infrastructure. It does give you the increased speed and agility because everything, as I mentioned, happens inside of the hypervisor at a line rate. You can move to the next slide, please. So what we see is that NSX is typically built around 3 main use cases. When we bought Nicira 4 or 5 years ago, what we saw is that automation was the number one use case that it essentially addressed. We see that a lot with developers, where you need, especially the layer 2, layer 3 capabilities to be very efficient, to enable developers to spin up applications quickly and also kill them very quickly as well. So automation, what we saw was the initial use case for NSX. But after our customers started using the product, they told us that actually security is something that is quite useful to have in that hypervisor layer. So what we see is that security has become absolutely the number one priority and use case in that space. About 70 to 80% of our customers are initially buying NSX for that security capability, and I will talk a little bit about exactly what that means. And then finally, application continuity. So what we see is that once you have the ability to create switching, routing, and layer 4 security capabilities in software, now we want to give you the ability to move that within data centers as well. So typical use cases for that we talk to customers about are the likes of data center consolidations or migrations and disaster recovery. To give you an example here, when it comes to data center migrations, typically there are 2 things that you can do in order to help move those applications. One of them is to stretch the layer 2 in the physical hardware, or spend a lot of time on re-IPing those applications. With NSX, we can all do that in software, and as long as you've got the layer 3 routing capabilities in the physical hardware, it becomes a lot easier to do that. We had a customer that had actually data centers built on the high-speed rail line, and they used NSX to move out because essentially the government gave them a very strict deadline, which was a very tight deadline to move their applications out. With NSX, they were able to do that a lot quicker as opposed to trying to do that in the physical layer. So these are the main 3 use cases that we typically talk to our customers about. And what you can see on the slide is the sub-use cases that I will go into touch on in the next couple of slides as well. So from a security perspective, what we are trying to solve here, yes, if you can move to the next slide, please. What we are trying to solve here is essentially moving our customers from a trust everyone to a don't trust anyone network. Because what we see is that typically most of our customers at the moment spend most of their budget on securing the perimeter of the firewall. And from a numbers perspective, we see about 80% of the budget, 70 to 80% of the security budget spent on that big firewall to essentially stop hackers and people that you don't want to come into the data center to stay out. But when you actually look at the traffic of today's network, most of the traffic, and what you can see on the slide, is about 70% of that actually happens inside of the data center between virtual machines. So when we talk about east to west traffic, what we mean is the traffic happening inside of the data center between the virtual machines. So clearly there is a problem there, is that most of the traffic happens inside of the data center, but about 20 or only 20 to 30% of the budget is actually spent on how to secure that traffic. So if you were trying to do that in a traditional way, if you can click next, please. If you were trying to do that in a traditional way, it would be operational infeasible. That's because it is impossible to put physical firewalls or use potentially VLANs to segment every single virtual machine inside of the data center. So what we now do is that with NSX, we are able to provide and wrap a layer 4 firewall potentially around every single virtual machine inside of the data center. And this is what the third picture will show on the right-hand side of the screen. So moving from a trust everyone network to a zero trust network is what we allow customers to do with NSX. Go to the next slide, please. And this is what we call pure microsegmentation. So what we see is that microsegmentation of virtual machines, and by the way, we don't just talk about virtual machines, you can potentially segment a certain application type. You can segment or wrap firewalls and apply security policies to certain departments if you wanted to segment, for example, HR from finance. So microsegmentation can be applied in a number of different ways. And this is what you can see in that middle section, all the different use cases. There are some of the examples that we see our customers using that for. So the first one would be VDI. We see a lot of customers applying microsegmentation to their virtual desktop environment. And that is because if you think about it, you would not need to you don't need those virtual desktops, the virtual machines talking to each other inside of the data center. We see a lot of our customers saving money and potentially helping them to achieve easier operations and management of the environment by collapsing their DMZ, by merging the different networks from a dev, test, and production perspective. Because if you can segment the environment in software, you would not need to have physically separate networks inside of the data center. There is a customer that recently worked with where they were selling finance software to their customers, and because they were selling it to very high brand profile customers, they had to make sure that all those customers they were hosting the finance software for were physically separated. So they have 7 networks, essentially 7 physically separate networks at the moment they are trying to manage with a very small IT team. So they are looking at NSX and the way that it can help them to essentially have one physical network layer, but provide that very, very robust and granular control and visibility and security from a software perspective. If you can move to the next slide, please. So one of the things that that I also put down on the previous slide from a partnership perspective, and I keep repeating the fact that it is a layer 4 security solution that we typically provide. Well, what we provide with NSX at the moment, it might change in the future, but what's important here is that WASP ecosystem partnership that we work with. Palo Alto, Checkpoint, and Trend, I'd say, are the key ones, because they are able to insert their security services inside NSX. So NSX is a platform, it's an open platform that our ecosystem partners can integrate their solutions with, essentially making sure that everything happens inside of that hypervisor, and you wouldn't have to, hairpin potentially traffic to a physical firewall outside of the host. But this gives you an overview of all the different partners that we work with from a compute networking perspective. But as I said, the key element is on what we do around security and the integration that we can provide with some of these vendors. So where we are with NSX at the moment, as I mentioned before, NSX has been on the market for 4 years, 5 years, nearly 5 years now, after the acquisition with Nicira. And what we found is NSX actually was adopted a lot faster than vSphere was back then. And the reason is because vSphere is something that customers are familiar with. They understand how we virtualize. They understand how we do that, and they are comfortable with what we do. And now we're doing exactly the same thing, but for networking and security. We are following exactly the same concept from a virtualization perspective. So it was actually adopted a lot faster than vSphere was back then, giving us the opportunity to have now globally around 2,400, 2,600 customers. If you can move to the next slide, please. This is what you can see on the left-hand side. A couple of other important things to call out on here is NSX is initially, I guess it was perceived as something that was only relevant to enterprise customers of ours because of the robustness of it, or potentially the cost of it. But this is not something that's true anymore. We see customers adopting regardless of their size and their vertical. From a size perspective, we work with customers that have 6 or 8 physical hosts, regardless of the number of employees. But also we've been working with customers that have 160 or 180 physical hosts. And the reason is that when it comes to the main use cases and the challenges that we help our customers solve, if you think about security, if you think about some of the challenges from an operational perspective, helping our customers to roll out applications a lot faster, reduce human error, etc. All of those things will be applicable to any customer regardless of size. And from a verticals perspective, what we've seen is we have typically, I'd say, 3 main verticals that seem to be driving the adoption of NSX, and that would be finance, healthcare, and higher education. And all of these will come down to the security use case, because security for them is absolutely in the forefront of their mind. They have valuable data to be protected from a finance perspective. If you're looking at healthcare data, as well as university research and data are obviously key. But it doesn't mean that we don't have customers from all the other verticals and sectors that you can see on the right-hand side of that screen. If you can move to the next one, please. And this is a slide that I typically bring up when we talk to customers around where we are in the market, because having a number of customers and case studies isn't just enough, but it's good to know that the industry and the likes of Gartner can see where we are going with our solution as well. And if you look at the right-hand side of that screen, the Magic Quadrant from 2017 July for data center networking, the interesting fact that we can see is that in the leaders quadrant, leaders and visionary quadrant, if you look at all the different vendors that we have there, the likes of Cisco, Arista, BigSwitch, Dell, Cumulus, and VMware, we are the only vendor that don't actually sell any physical networking kit. All we do is software. So being recognized as one of the visionaries, I guess, and you're getting closer to that leaders quadrant by Gartner, we see as a very is a very big thing, because they believe we are going in the right direction and the solution that we provide is well received in the market. You can move to the next slide, please. So we have a number of case studies available online, and I just put out a couple here, UK based one. I mentioned finance being one of our leader verticals in that space, as well as universities. And these are public case studies that you should be able to find on our website as well. And I would go and have a look and read some of the challenges they were looking at, because everything is around those 3 use cases. Being able to bring automation by extracting the intelligence and putting everything into software is something that helped these customers realize some very key benefits and values. If you look at we talked about the zero trust approach and how we are allowing customers to have that more granular and better visibility of the security inside of the data center. And this is exactly what University of Central Lancashire discusses in their case studies. You can move to the next slide, please. And finally, a couple of other things that I wanted to touch on before I pass it over to Peter. You can move to the next slide, please. So when we talk about NSX, obviously every new technology and innovation would have 3 elements to be considered. One of them is the technology, the process, and obviously the people that actually manage and use that new technology. And what we found with NSX is that when it comes to the solution, we know that it works. We have some great case studies, POCs that we delivered. We've got a growing number of customers in the industry. But what you need to think about is how the processes and the people element works around it, because it is a big change. It is a very different way of looking at how we deploy networking and security in the data center, and it will require a lot of planning and understanding of how the different teams in the organization would work together. And we have a couple of different ways that we can do and help you with that, and provide example of other customers that have gone through that similar process. You can move to the next slide, please. And from a process perspective, what we found, especially from a microsegmentation perspective, that it's not deploying NSX and security being one of, well, it is the easiest use case to start off with, because it doesn't require any sort of changes in the underlying infrastructure. And we typically do POCs, proof of concept for microsegmentation in a day or 2. But what we found is it's not about deploying it and understanding the technology, but in order to do so, customers would have to understand exactly the traffic that happens inside of the data center. They will need to understand which virtual machine talks to which virtual machine. And this planning of microsegmentation is what we found being the most crucial part of that project, and something that customers would need to spend time on. And we also see that this is something that gives most of our organizations the opportunity to actually start from scratch and understand exactly what happens inside of the data center, especially when you're looking at some of the regulations that are coming in the near future, such as GDPR. So vRealise Network Insight is a software, and I think Peter might mention that at the end, we are able to help our customers to provide free assessments of their estate. And this is a report that we can run and you can generate by downloading the software that would give you an idea about what the east-west traffic, the north-south traffic looks like inside of the data center, and gives you very valuable recommendation around how you should be planning or microsegmenting the environment. The vRealise Network Insight does have other use cases. One of them is that pre-deployment and planning, that something can be done for free. But once vRealise Network Insight is deployed, it does give you valuable data around how your NSX environment is configured and making sure that it keeps track of the health and any potential issues, providing troubleshooting benefits as well. If you can move to the next slide, please. And this is the last thing that I wanted to cover in that 30 minutes is some of the things that we can do going forward. Because as I said, if you wanted to understand what NSX can do, the best is to engage face-to-face and essentially draw things out, see some demonstrations and whiteboarding to build up some of those capabilities that we talked about. So a couple of ones that I'd like to call out here that you can take advantage of and you can ask your account managers about. One of them are half-a-day sessions, typically in NSX workshops that, as I mentioned, cover the capabilities of NSX. And the best is to invite all parties from your teams, because what we see is that once the security, networking, and the virtualization teams are working together and they understand exactly what NSX can do, they can better align and analyze essentially the impact that it would have on the environment. We also have 2-day technical deep dives available to our customers free of charge. And these are quite heavy and intensive courses, but it does give you the opportunity to get some hands-on practice and experience with the technology as well. There is an opportunity to do hands-on labs and have trial licenses on NSX, as well as doing proof of concept if you would like to understand exactly what it would do and how it would work in your environment. We talked about the network assessment that would help you with the planning of microsegmentation and helping you to understand exactly the east-west traffic and the communication inside of the data center. And also we can help you understand and provide workshops around how NSX would impact potentially the people and the processes that you currently run inside IT. So these are some of the pre-deployment and resources that we can provide, because that top line gives you some of the opportunities that you can take advantage of from a technology perspective, from a technical perspective. The other things that we can provide you with, if you look at the bottom of that slide, is around building business cases. Because what we found with NSX is, if you remember those 3 use cases, the automation, security, and application continuity to help you with multi-data center setup, the more use cases we can find, the easier it will be to build the business case and provide the ROI for the solution. And finally, probably the one last thing to mention here, I mean, I did mention case studies and the references that we have available. And these are not just references that you can see on a PDF, but if you engage with the account managers or VMware directly, we can help and put you in touch with other customers that have already gone through that journey. And we also have a lot of executives coming to the UK from the US to provide insight to roadmaps and where NSX is going from an overall solution perspective. So these are some of the things that you can take away from a next step perspective, I guess, and the resources that you have available. And I think I've just got one more slide to cover before I'm going to pass it on to Peter, which is around licensing. So if you remember, again, referring back to the use cases that we talked about, our licensing model is aligned to those use cases. NSX is licensed based on physical sockets on a server, and depending on the use case that would be applicable to you, would you go for the different packages. So standard is aligned to the automation use case if you wanted to have the basic layer 2 and layer 3 capabilities. If you're looking at security, which we see most of our customers are going for, you would be looking at the advanced bundle. And this is the bundle that would give you that layer 4 distributed firewalling capability that we mentioned before. And then the final one is the enterprise bundle, and that we align to the application continuity use case. So if you wanted to use the capability of structuring that layer 2 network inside of the software, this is the bundle that you would be going for. Now, we do have a couple of different ways of licensing NSX. I mentioned desktop and VDI being a key use case for NSX, and we have the capability of licensing NSX for that specific use case based on users rather than physical sockets. There will be a point where it would be a lot more cost effective to look at it and see the pricing from a CPU perspective. But if you're looking at potentially no more than 30 or 40 users, it'll be a lot more cost effective to look at that slightly different licensing structure. From a remote office and branch office perspective, we are extending NSX to the edge, again, to these robust sites. But we appreciate that those branch offices are potentially a lot smaller, with a couple of hosts potentially, with not many virtual machines. But if you wanted to extend those capabilities of applying the firewalling to virtual machines, then we can provide it in packages of 25 VMs. And finally, I mentioned vRealise Network Insight that is licensed separately. I did mention that the assessment in order to help you with the planning of microsegmentation is something that's free of charge. But if you do want to use the solution to monitor and help with the actual running of NSX, this is something, again, licensed by physical sockets on a server. And this comes in two packages. The first one is what we call the advanced, if you are looking at the on-premise usage of it. And if you were looking at, for example, integration with cloud providers, such as AWS, then you would be going for the enterprise version of it. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of idea about how we license it, some of the things that we've seen in the market, and how NSX is perceived, what it's capable of. And I'm going to pass it over now to Peter to cover some of the the ways that you can apply it to AirWatch as well.
Okay, thank you, Rika. Hi everyone. The reason why we've put this part onto the end of this webinar is because typically we're finding that we're being asked the question about how they can see the benefits of NSX helping in the data center and how it can really secure the back-end infrastructure but how does that apply to users on the endpoints and really securing that environment as well? And so just taking you back to one of the slides that Rika's already really shown already, this is kind of VMware's vision, and we kind of accept that they really have this ability to be able to help out in the data center with their cross-cloud architecture, and their offering really covers us in being able to help us in that respect. But they also are able to give the ability to have all devices in your network also managed, and this was part of an acquisition they made in 2014 when they purchased AirWatch, and have now integrated it into their entire feature stack that really makes it quite a compelling offering. So really what they're trying to do is trying to, wherever it is that you've got workloads, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's in your own data center, it should be secure, and you should be able to support any application on any device. But you'll notice that there is that security focus throughout all of those areas that they want to support. So one of the primary areas of concern that we're seeing that is a problem is when you have devices that are accessing applications that are in your data center remotely. Typically this is done via a VPN tunnel, and customers are spending a lot of money on that VPN infrastructure. They're making sure that it's very bulletproof and it's robust, and that's good. The VPN tunnel itself, there should be no issues with, but really the problems are at either end. So you've got the mobile device itself. Is that really something that has question marks over it? Is it at the latest security release? Does it have necessary tools to be able to lock it down in certain respects? Is it on an open Wi-Fi? There's a lot of questions that can be raised that really expose it when you think that these users can be accessing applications anywhere via your VPN, and you don't have visibility of where that person possibly may be. So these are question marks that are raised both from the user point of view, if you are empowering your users to be able to use applications on a mobile. But then you've got the question marks also as to what Rika's been covering this morning around the data center. And when a user does access an application in their data center, what else could they potentially have access to? Are they able to then get access to any other application servers or any other virtual machines that are side by side on that data center network? So it's both ends that really are being brought into question here, and that's why we really have considerations that we need to focus on when we're talking about mobility. These sort of questions are things that really are important and at the top of anyone's agenda who's considering a workspace transformation. How much access do mobile users have to your internal resources? And that previous diagram really showed how exposed you could be if something like microsegmentation isn't being used. But also the fact that the entire device has access to a VPN and not just on a single application basis. So it's really asking that question of when you want to mobilize users, how much resources do they have access to? And if there was ever an attack or a breach of any sorts, how would you be able to deal with that? Do you have the technologies in place to prevent it in the first place? And if there was a breach, how would you minimize the damage? So VMware fortunately have got a solution in place, and it's the way that they've integrated the products like AirWatch and NSX that is really being able to ease any concerns that we're finding are being presented and as challenges for people today. If you consider a typical scenario for a mobile device will have, if it requires a VPN access to a data center, well then what will happen is the full device will have VPN access, and it will be completely mobilized to be able to access a data center network. So the exposure and the risk level there is quite high, because you're then saying that if there is that compromisation of that device, there is the potential that your entire network or your entire data center could possibly be exposed due to this VPN that is enabled on your device. At the other end, at the data center end, as you can see, it's full access to your network. So if you are taking in, if you are making sure you've got siloed environments or you've got mobile application specific environments, then that's good. But generally, a VPN access is access to a network, and sometimes those measures aren't being taken. So one of the things that can be done is you can do an app level VPN on a mobile device. And this is using VMware's AirWatch functionality. You can assign an application to have VPN access only via that application. So it's not the entire device, it's only via the application that you'll be able to get access into the VPN. But by doing this still, there is still the danger that even though you're only allowing one application to have VPN access, you could still potentially get access to all your network resources in the data center, because there's all of this side-by-side traffic that's going on within the data center. So the solution that really is the best fit is using mobile AirWatch's capabilities of app-level VPN, which only then has select network access to the application server it needs to get access to. And of course, having discussed the capabilities of microsegmentation with NSX, and Rika's gone through that, you can see how beneficial that could be, in that it really minimizes the risk to your data center and minimizes any breach capabilities that you possibly might have if a mobile device was to be compromised. So that's just a very quick overview of how this could possibly work if that is something that is a concern to your mobile workforce. The integration between AirWatch and NSX is very, very good as well. Although it is two completely different products and two completely different functionalities, what they've done is they've integrated the two policy sets so that you're able to make sure that any policies that you push via AirWatch will pick up NSX policies, provided that they're set up initially. So you don't have to keep repeating the process over and over again. If you're pushing out applications to users, you can make sure that whatever it is that you want as a segmented NSX policy can be automatically set in the profile of the AirWatch policy. And this is done just by we're just going to take you through a couple of slides that can show that these are the settings that you can set here from the NSX point of view, and then both from the AirWatch point of view, where it's an initial setup configuration that's very, very quick, but going forward, being able to map your mobile apps to security groups, both from an AirWatch point of view, from an NSX point of view, is very, very quick and easy. So it doesn't have to be slow, cumbersome. You're not having to support and manage two entirely different features all the time in order to get this going. The two products are under the banner of VMware Workspace ONE, previously as it was called AirWatch, but it's still the AirWatch engine. Anyone who's using AirWatch will know that. It's now just licensed as a different name now. So it's now called VMware Workspace ONE, and it comes under the Advanced and Enterprise licensing. And for VMware NSX, of course, you'd need to be able to enable that microsegmentation. So as Rika showed in one of our slides, it'd be either part of the Advanced or Enterprise licensing you'd need to purchase for that. So if this is something that you can foresee as something you might have something of an interest, you're seeing that there's a lot of mobile exposure, and this per app VPN and microsegmentation, securing the workload is something of interest. We'd be happy to take you on that journey and have a look at it together. We offer a number of services at Bytes that can help you on any sort of cloud roadmaps you're having. But as we've spoken about before, the assessments that we can run that really get an in-depth insight into your network is something that we can really work with you on. And of course, we also run workshops every couple of months that these are really good opportunities for you to understand the technology a bit better for NSX. But also we get a chance for our customers to sit together and have in-depth discussions with your fellow peers. And what we found is this is really good because it reinforces your own understanding of how you've done things in comparison to how other customers are doing things, and really reinforces the fact that you've been doing things properly and actually you've got similar challenges. So we'd be happy to help you. If you'd be interested in coming to one of our workshops, do let us know. And we'll open up the floor for Q&A. If anyone has any questions, do let us know. Or additionally, if you do want to come to one of our workshops, there's a couple of questions at the end where you can tick the box and let us know if you'd like to come along to one of those. But for now, if you have any questions, do let us know. So first question that's just come through, is there any difference between AirWatch and Workspace ONE? Very, very subtle difference between AirWatch and Workspace ONE is the introduction of a feature from VMware called Identity Manager. There's a application portal that they've introduced with Workspace ONE, which allows you to access applications from any device, be it Windows 10, Mac, iOS, Android. With AirWatch, typically that was always their mobile device management or enterprise mobility management product of choice, but they've now integrated it with some of their other EUC products, Identity Manager being one of them, and they've come up with this. I won't call it a bundle, but it's a feature called Workspace ONE, where the license is now a lot better to understand than the old AirWatch type color bundles that they used to do, and you can buy it in standard, advanced, and enterprise. So it's very, very much easier to understand, but you get the same functionality that you always did with AirWatch. It's just there's added features now. Another question, can you see anywhere in the roadmap where they may look to protect physical workloads comparable to ACI? Rika, is that something that you might be able to answer?
Yes, so from a physical perspective, no, because we might need to clarify exactly the question. What do you mean by I guess everything that's not sit on VMware estate. So if it's a physical workload and it doesn't sit on VMware, then the answer is, I guess the short answer is no. And that is because you need to use our hypervisor, the vSphere, because everything that we do is now sit inside of the kernel, inside of the hypervisor. And that we will have the opportunity to extend that. And at the moment, actually, we do start supporting KVM. So we are looking at multi-hypervisor support, but it has to be a virtual environment.
Okay, thank you, Rika. Another question about sharing a document that explains the product bundles. I assume that means the product bundles for Workspace ONE, and I'll be happy to send that out to anyone who's interested in that.
Okay, brilliant. So thanks, Rika and Peter, for presenting the webinar today. So that's all the questions we have. So thanks everyone for taking the time out of your day to join. And as mentioned previously, there is a really short feedback form at the end. So if you would like any further information, or if you're interested in one of the NSX experience days, then please do let us know, and one of our specialists will be in touch with you. We're also, we recorded the webinar today, so I'll send you all an email this afternoon with a link to the recording. Okay, so thanks Rika and Peter again, and thanks everyone for joining. Thank you.